everyone, to the July 27th City Council work session. This is our last one before a break. I just wanted to bring to your attention that you have a revised agenda in front of you, which adds the climate ordinance as a D. And we're going to take off the equity and contracting program from our today's agenda because Councilor Evans is not able to be here, and this is something that he's been working on for a long time, so it seemed to me inappropriate to go on to have that presentation when he can't be here. So we'll start out today with the Eugene Water and Electric Board Riverfront update. City Manager.
Thanks, Mayor, and I'll turn over to Glenn, and this is just really a continuation of your previous conversation.
I guess I have to open the Urban Renewal District, right? So I'm going to close the City Council meeting, and I'm going to convene a meeting of the Eugene Urban Renewal Agency, and then...
So this is a follow-up to the executive session we had with you several weeks ago. As we've continued the conversations with eWeb about what kind of an agreement would make sense, eWeb had requested that the Urban Renewal Agency actually wind up owning the property, subject to eWeb agreeing to hold us harmless from any claims related to the liability for existing environmental contamination. And so what we'd like you to do, because that's outside of at least how we have interpreted the terms that you previously approved as the Urban Renewal Agency, is to expand those terms. And if you have questions or want to discuss before I give Betty a motion that we'd like you to approve, we can do that. But basically what the motion would do is...
Alan.
Oh,
I'm the vice chair.
got it. Sorry. Add to the manager's, actually the Urban Renewal Agency Director's authority, is to approve an agreement that would allow the agency to actually own the property and to allow an agreement that would not have an environmental remediation fund or the remnant parcel provisions, and instead there would just be a reduction in the purchase price. So similar to what we talked about in executive session.
So, Glenn, it would be helpful to me because even though we've talked about executive session, we haven't really discussed it in front of the public at length. So maybe some of the reasons why we're making a decision to go in this direction and why we might think this is a good idea for our community.
Sure. I'll start, and then if Denny or John want to add, they can do so. So the agreement that we've been working on with eWeb basically was intended to allow the expertise of the city, the Urban Renewal Agency, to be the prime assistance in trying to get this property developed. eWeb's mission is not developing property. Denny and his staff for decades have been doing that kind of work. When we first started talking to eWeb about, in essence, becoming their real estate broker, and as we tried to work out an agreement with them that would allow the agency to have the conversations with potential developers, it got complicated because, in essence, we would be asking eWeb, okay, we found a developer, here's the deed, would you just sign the deed, turn the property over? A lot of the discussions with developers would necessarily involve city staff, Urban Renewal Agency staff, because of the nature of that development. It's going to require infrastructure. It's going to require assistance from our planning folks because of the eWeb master plan that the council approved, and that gets implemented through our planning staff. There's the parkland that eWeb's already agreed to provide to the city that will get developed consistent with, or in a consistent manner with, the rest of that development. And so having the city/agency be working with developers will make it much more efficient, result in, we think, a much better product, a quicker development than if we were working through eWeb. What eWeb had understood as we were having those early conversations is that after 5 years, the agency would actually wind up owning the property. What they're mostly interested in is getting back to their core mission, which is to provide water and electricity. It's not to be a developer. And so they had agreed that they would allow the agency to be sort of their real estate broker, but if we weren't able to assist in the sale of all the property within 5 years, their assumption had been at that point the agency would actually take the possession of the property so they could just be done with it. As we had been talking to them, we didn't have that same assumption. And so the issue for us in part was wanting to make sure that if the agency takes on this responsibility, this authority, that the agency does not assume any of the environmental liability that's associated with that property. We didn't cause it. We weren't the owners when it was caused or before that. EWEB was not trying to alleviate itself of that liability. They're still going through the process with DEQ to get the no further action letter to demonstrate that in fact all the contamination has been addressed in a way that is protective of public health and safety. So this alternative would say it's okay for the agency to actually take ownership of the property, again provided that the purchase and sale agreement has this ironclad hold harmless, so that if there is any residual contamination that's discovered later that is required to be cleaned up, we can turn to EWEB and say, EWEB, DEQ is saying this parcel over here has some contamination, it needs to be cleaned up. Here's a letter from DEQ, please take care of it.
Anything else either of you want to add? Okay. I'm going to put a motion on the table.
I move to amend the agency director's authority to enter into agreement with EWEB about the riverfront property by A, authorizing the purchase of the property, but only if EWEB holds the agency and city harmless for any legal claim based on environmental contamination existing as of the date title transfers to the agency, and B, the possible elimination of the environmental mitigation fund and the remnant parcel provision, provided there is sufficient reduction in price.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. John, how long do you estimate it will take to go through the process of final negotiations here and getting close to executing on an agreement? Just estimate.
With EWEB, our hope would be to have that finalized 60 days.
60?
My, that's quick.
Relatively speaking.
Well, and you know we've been working through this for 12 months. With EWEB, they've had a change in leadership, so that's been a part of what's sort of worked through through this process, and then it really has come down to trying to figure out how to work through this topic that Glenn has talked about with who owns the property when. Mm-hmm. And so we believe this is essentially the last significant deal point that needs to be worked out. And so we would hope that it gets taken care of quicker or sooner than later.
And just out of odd curiosity, would the Urban Renewal Agency own the property, or would the city, or what's the difference?
So in the beginning, it would be the Urban Renewal Agency. Nothing would preclude you as the Urban Renewal Agency from deciding to sell or give to the city the property. In terms of liability, there really isn't any difference. The reason why initially the agency would own the property, because it's the agency that's paying the dollars for it. So the agency is basically purchasing the property. But the agency, you acting as the agency could decide that it's in the public interest and to have the property developed in a certain way, and if that means the city is the owner for some period of time, you would have the authority to do that.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, I think we're ready to vote on this. All those in favor, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In opposition, 1. It passes. Thank you. We'll move on to the next. Oh, I have to move out of the Urban Renewal Agency and back into the Eugene City Council's work session meeting. And the next item up is a work session on Granite Properties. City Manager?
Thank you, Mayor, and I'll turn it over to Denny and his team.
Thank you. We're here to talk about the Granite Properties project on Olive Street, which is a MUPD application, the multi-unit property tax exemption. And we're both anxious and excited to be here today to talk about this. And I think the anxiety is really around, this is the first project that's coming through the new MUPD program, which we spent considerable time with council modifying that program. And because it's first through the process, we've learned a lot. We're continuing to learn a lot about the new process. The excitement really is around, this is downtown housing. And, Robin and his staff were here last week talking about Envision Eugene and targeting 1,000 units to occur of multi-unit housing to occur downtown. This is only 36 units, but it's that incremental step towards getting to some of our goals around multi-unit housing and density downtown. We're also excited because, just to put it in perspective, this is the first newly constructed non-student housing, actually market rate housing, rental housing that has been constructed, or at least proposed to be constructed in the downtown plan area since 1999. So there's a perception that there's been a lot of housing. We built affordable housing, we built student housing. We really haven't built from the ground up market rate housing downtown since Broadway Place in 1999. So that's why we're excited that someone's interested in building downtown, and this appears to be a really great opportunity. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Amanda and Nan, and they're going to provide a project overview and some information about the
May I
MUPD
ask you one
application.
question before you do that? So we know with the placed apartments, and we know the apartments that are above.
And I should qualify that. That's renovation of existing buildings, but building housing from the ground up.
Got it.
We really haven't seen that since Broadway Place. It's been some time.
Thank you, that
Yes.
helps clarify.
Good afternoon. Nan and I will make a short presentation today on the MUPD program, the project and its public benefits, and the community member review panel. You'll have the rest of the time for your discussion. And should you wish to take action today, your packet contained the resolution. MUPD is an incentive program for high-quality multi-unit downtown housing. Student housing is ineligible. The property tax exemption is on qualified investments approved by council within this specific area. It's generally the downtown plan boundary. In 2015, after 2.5 years of review, City Council extensively revised the program criteria, the process, and the boundary. A description of how the program changed and the revised program guide were in your packet for today. I'll briefly touch on the third-party reviews and the process. Council added 2 aspects to the program for a third-party review. The MUPD review panel consists of 4 neighborhood representatives and 6 technical representatives. It reviews applications and make recommendation to the city manager prior to council action. It reviews the approved projects and reviews the program annually. The independent consultant reviews the financial information and the need for the tax exemption prior to council action. This is the process diagram. It's on page 4 of attachment A in your packet. This slide is pretty impossible to read. What it does show is that there are a lot of layers and steps. The process generally falls into 2 categories: the application review and the post-approval compliance. For the application process, the highlights are neighborhood contact, a 30-day comment period, financial consultant review, and the MUPD review panel. For post-approval compliance, there are 2 opportunities for the neighborhood. The design is reviewed prior to permits. Required documentation is submitted for specific public benefits, and the review panel meets midway through construction and when construction is complete. These are the 7 required public benefits for the program, and we'll talk more about them specific to Olive Lofts. I'll pass it to Nan.
Great, thank you. So Olive Lofts, as proposed, is 5 stories total, with 4 new floors of housing over an existing ground floor. Altogether, 36 units, in addition to ground floor commercial space, which includes the storefront as well as the 3 studio spaces facing the alley. The project also includes approximately 2,000 square feet owned by the Urban Renewal Agency, as you approved in April. I apologize, I feel like my mic is going in and out. If that's the case, okay.
You're going in.
Okay, I'm going in and out. I'll try to stay in. Here's the former rogue parcel, well as the agency parcel. If MUPD is approved, the sale of this property will proceed. Construction will begin in 2017 with a proposed construction schedule of approximately 18 months. Compact urban development is a key public benefit that implements the downtown plan and Envision Eugene. In this case, since the property is Zone C3, there is no minimum required density, but the project would actually exceed the density of the R4 zone, which is our densest residential zone, and it would help to reinforce a compact urban core, foster vibrancy, and take advantage of existing infrastructure, including transit. In terms of the green building features, Granite Properties will use the Building and Permit Services pathway to enable the building to achieve this standard. And that means submitting an energy usage model, and Granite Properties is already working with EWEB on that. And then they will be required to submit a commissioning report 18 months after occupancy to demonstrate compliance with the required public benefit. The developer has submitted a plan to address the public benefit of the local economic impact with lists of the contractors and subcontractors to be used on the project, demonstrating that approximately 80% of the construction dollars will be spent locally, and they are obligated to comply with wage, tax, and licensing laws. 30% of the units will have rents that qualify as moderate income rents, and that amount will remain throughout the life of the MUPD. When the building is completed, 100% of the units may be at that level, depending on market conditions. We took a good look at the scale, form, and the quality of the building, the mixture of project elements, the relationship to the street and surrounding uses, which in this case also includes adjacent properties as well as KLCC, and parking and circulation. And I'll start with that because no parking is required for this building, but parking is available in nearby city-owned garages. The quality of materials is important to creating a high-quality pedestrian zone. The ground floor has durable materials appropriate to a downtown street, glass and stucco with wood accents, and the upper floors use fiber cement lap siding and concrete or stucco with glass and wood as accent materials. The material palette and, in fact, the design will be required as a condition of approval in the drafted resolution. The ground floor has commercial storefronts wrapping into the alley, which is just right for an urban location like this. Lots of glass to showcase the indoor activity and provide visual interest for the passersby on the street. It's good for safety and vibrancy. The building has a clear base, middle, and top distinction, and the elevator is a signature element that unifies the floors with a feature that provides scale and visual interest. The residential units have large windows, some of which are operable, and a series of canopies at each floor level to ward off the rain and the worst of the summer sun, so it's appropriate for our climate. The effect on the pedestrian is that the building has a comprehensible scale. It's not overwhelming, and the windows absolutely provide eyes on the street. The tall first floor has a cornice line above the storefront that roughly corresponds to the context of the neighboring buildings. That creates an inviting entry and helps the building to fit in. I want to focus more on the context for just a minute. Here's the existing ground floor. And the biggest issue identified is the impact on KLCC. So here's a roof view. The orange-ish square off to the left is the Rogue. You can see the Rogue sign, and this will be the new Olive Lofts. And the blue circle up there is actually the location of KLCC's, where KLCC's signal comes from. When the project is finished, the signal will be blocked. The city manager's recommendation is that KLCC be held harmless with their signal remaining in place and no cost burden on KLCC from this project. If council approves the MUPD, there are a number of options that deliver this result that the city will be pursuing. There is no impact on historic property, and there was no housing existing on the site. Amanda, cover the next.
Johnson Economics, a real estate consultant firm, provided review of the financial information and pro forma. A pro forma is a prediction of future financial performance based on assumptions of key variables: rents, vacancy rates, interest rates, cap rates, to name a few. The Johnson Economics analysis is in your packet as Attachment D, concluded that the tax exemption is needed for the project to qualify for conventional financing and to generate a return sufficient to attract the required equity investment. The review panel also reviewed the Johnson Economics analysis. They noted that evaluating the project's financial need for the MUPD involves many variables that are hard to predict. Without a crystal ball, it's hard to pinpoint specific performance for the future. The review panel met 3 times, provided a thorough review of the application and the Johnson Economics analysis. The panel concluded that the project meets the public benefit criteria and has a demonstrated financial need for the exemption. The panel recommended approval to the city manager with varying opinions on the length. A majority recommended the 10-year exemption and a minority recommended a 5-year exemption. Attachment B of your packet has the panel conclusions. Should council approve the resolution, the next steps would look like this: to ensure that the project complies with the approval conditions outlined in the resolution. As a reminder, noncompliance would result in civil penalties, not getting the exemption, or termination of the exemption. I'll pass it back to Denny.
So the recommendation is to approve the MUPD exemption. And the approval is really based on several things. I talked about Envision Eugene and our goal to bring 1,000 units of multi-unit housing downtown. It's based on the panel's review of the project and it meeting the criteria, and they making a recommendation that a tax exemption is warranted for this project. The consultant's financial review is also part of a component of our recommendation. Again, just another layer of justification for the need for the tax exemption. But ultimately, it really comes around the public benefits, I believe. We're talking about density and neighborhood preservation and walkability and health and climate and energy and all those things that I think a dense housing project downtown brings to the community. And also the project merits. This is a good project, we believe. I think it adds value, it adds economic value. We're talking about innovation districts and attracting talent, and there's a lot of components. But with that said, I think this is the first project under the MUPD program, and one of the things we've talked as a staff and talked with the panel is that we need to get it right. I think we need to make sure that we provide a project that the community expects and envisions, that really was the reason for keeping this MUPD program in place and making some modifications. So we're hoping that the new MUPD will produce the results that really we envision, so we have to get it right.
Thank you. I've got anything else? No, I've got 3 people in the queue, but before I call on them, could you please remind us who's on the panel that reviewed it?
The at-large neighborhood representatives are Bill Aspegren and Lloyd Hellickson. The 2 neighborhood-specific representatives are Sherry Schaefers and Pete Knox. Then the technical members include Jeff Harms, Phil Carrasco, Justin Overdevest, Sarah Bennett, Larry Banks, and Zach Manning.
Thank you for that. So the other question I have before I pass on is, so what is the, tell us the implications of the 10 and 5-year MUPD approval.
The implications meaning the 2 recommendations,
Yeah.
the kind of the majority and minority.
One's minority,
Yes.
and I just want to understand
I think the panel, and Amanda can weigh into it, but the panel spent most of their time on the need equation, really is looking at the numbers, diving into the numbers. As Amanda mentioned, there's a lot of variables that come into this analysis, and we don't have a crystal ball. You have to be able to project rents and interest rates and operating cost and cap rates and is the developer fee reasonable, and all construction costs and all of those variables. And so if you move those numbers around enough, you adjust the rents and the cap rates and interest rates, you might come to a different conclusion. And I think really that's what happened. We would do it one way, the consultant may tweak the numbers a little different, and some of the panelists might make their own assumptions about those kinds of variables. So it's hard to get a group of people to come to the same conclusion on something that has so many variables. So it is not surprising that there's a little bit of variation, and we see that as being okay, because our goal really is that we really have this panel vet and the consultant vet the numbers to the greatest extent possible. So we didn't really see that as a bad outcome, having some variation. I think the truth be told is we really don't know. I think the majority, all of the panelists agreed that a tax exemption is needed, but there's some variance maybe in what assumptions you make in the term of the tax exemption.
Is it possible to give a 5-year and then renew it for another 5 if it's needed?
I would need to take a look at that, but my guess is no, because the MUPD is supposed to be approved prior to construction.
I think the other issue with that is certainty. Developers move forward and lenders make loans based on certainty. And if there's any question about the term, they will just assume it's a 5-year tax exemption. So it does affect the feasibility of the project one way or another.
Yeah. Okay. Mike, you're up first.
Thank you, Mayor. 2 questions. Number 1, and by the way, thank you for the presentation. Very well done. Why do we have Johnson Economics evaluate the financials of the project?
That was a feature of the program that City Council added with the program revisions.
Right. So what's the fundamental difference between having them do the analysis of the financials and having the review panel do it? I mean, because it sounds like they came to different conclusions.
The simple answer is they're not experts.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, the Johnson Economics is they do this. They do this for developers. They do this for communities all over the Northwest, probably. So I think the idea was to bring a third-party independent expert into the equation, so the council and the community is not relying on a staff analysis or a group of panelists that really aren't experts in the field.
Well, and that's why I bring it up. I don't mean to be disrespectful at all to the panelists who evaluated it, but I'm interested in their evaluation as citizens for a number of other reasons, not necessarily the need, because as you've mentioned, and as we all know, they're not experts. They don't do this for a living, and they don't know how to get it right. So I wouldn't necessarily as a counselor, want to lean on their opinion of the financial evaluation as the most important piece of their contribution to this, so much as I would want to know what they thought about it with the other pieces that they're going to play along through the complete process. Can you turn back to your page 14, your slide 14 for a second? It's the one on required public benefit, local economic impact plan.
It's one more back.
Okay. Okay, so if we could pause the time, please, while we're looking through this instead of having that tick off. Thank you. All right. Right here, the 80% dollars stay local piece. One of the things I heard you say when you were talking about it was the local contractors and local subcontractors. When we went through the lengthy process of redoing the MUPD, one of the pieces that I brought up and wanted to make sure we put in, and as I understand it, we did, was the piece around certified payroll, so that we would know where the employees on the project lived. Now, I'm wondering what our internal process is for evaluation there, because like I said, I heard you say contractors and subcontractors, and I don't particularly care about that so much as I care on the analysis of whether or not it's local, that they're actual local people doing the job, and I want us to be measuring that.
I will answer that. Just want to
We-
consult the process.
We started with certified payroll, but I think we opted for something different, and I think Amanda will be able to come with it. But certified payroll is a specific tool used for complying with prevailing wage, and that's not really the right tool, because this is not a prevailing wage issue. It's a goal that we have for local hiring.
Right.
So we did move away from certified payroll
But
as
that was a part of the ordinance, wasn't it?
not certified payroll. But Amanda, I think, might be able to capture what we actually put in the ordinance.
After completion of construction, they need to submit a report that includes the construction labor resident zip codes, and then we can analyze the local nature of those workers.
So in the presentation, you mentioned contractors and subcontractors. Will you be, so I'm hearing you now say you're going to analyze for the people who actually worked on the project for their locale, to be able to use that as a standard for the measurement of the local.
And the Granite Properties submitted a list of the people that they intend to use on the project as well, for the contractors and the subcontractors, which is a slightly different issue than the actual workers.
And that's the 80% number.
Well, that's what I was asking. What's our process? Is it measuring just, because it doesn't take much to go down and open up a small office and say, I'm a local contractor, when my office isn't really here. What I'm interested in is the people who actually live here are doing the work. So are we measuring that?
We will be collecting data on who was working.
That's our standard for the 80%.
The 80%.
Glenn would like to talk to requiring the percentage local.
I'm just talking about what we passed in the ordinance. Is that a piece of it, or is it administrative?
As I recall, the ordinance does not contain an absolute requirement.
No, but I'm talking about the fact that it doesn't have an absolute number, but it says that we will ask for that to be submitted. I'm asking how we are measuring it internally.
So on packet page 199, Mike, is what Amanda said about what the MUPTI applicant is going to need to do. And so we will be getting, the applicant will have to submit, and we will be getting a list of the home, city, or zip codes of the construction labor workers. So we will get that information, and we'll be able to do the analysis of, okay, so who was working on this project, and were they, to use the loose terms, were they local, or do they live in Salem, Portland, Idaho? So if your question is, will we be able to know how many of the...
Not my question,
Okay.
just real clearly. What's our stand?
Another round.
Oh, okay.
Okay. All right. We'll just think about it and we'll catch you back, Kelly.
Well, I've thought about it. I've tried to ask it 3 ways.
I know, but time is up. George Polling.
I have just one real quick question, and that's about the KLCC issue. You said that there are several or a number of options that we're looking at. Can you go into a real brief detail of what some of those options are? And the main question is, I'm going to have a real hard time voting yes unless there's some guarantee that KLCC will be able to continue to broadcast after completion. So I wasn't real sold on that by what you were saying at this point. So kind of help me on that one.
The language that we've included in the resolution is that this project can't go forward unless KLCC continues to maintain their broadcasting and is held harmless, does not incur any costs. So some of the items that we're looking at include a relocation of their satellite, and they've already looked into that themselves. We've been working with a technical expert to see how many options they have. So I'm going to separate it into 2 parts. Technically, what do they need to do to maintain the signal? And then financially, how much does it cost and who pays for it? And we felt that we had options in both of those categories, and that one possibility could include having the city finance the relocation costs. And those details would be worked out at the direction of the city manager. But the goal and the language in the resolution is that KLCC gets to continue broadcasting and they are not charged.
Yeah, I guess I'm still not hearing who's going to foot the bill for this.
Danny, do you
Going
want
to
to
be
go?
the city, the developers, or a low-interest loan, or
We don't have a definite plan. They're still working on their kind of cost and relocation plan. I think Nan gave an example. We're going to sell them property, the urban renewal district, the property behind. That money's going to go into our loan fund. That's traditional path for non-tax increment revenue to go into the loan fund. We could then use that as a tool really to help them relocate, whether it be a loan to KLCC or a loan to the developer or what have you. So I don't have a definitive plan yet because they don't have a definitive plan yet, but I think our goal really is to try to be as creative as possible to make this project happen. And we do that all the time. We have to use a lot of creativity to push projects forward downtown. So this is just one of those opportunities where we're going to have to partner and get creative about how we solve that, but we don't want it to be on KLCC's dime.
thank you.
Betty?
Thank you. I read all this material, including the minority report and the comments by citizens. I also have been talked to by a few citizens, and the overwhelming majority of just ordinary people say, do not give another tax break. For the material from the minority report made much more sense to me than, well, we had facts, arguments based on facts. And the way I read it, they did not all say that there should be a MUFTI. They said, if there is, 3 years should be sufficient and 5 years at the most. But they did not think it was necessary to provide a profit to the people. I like the comment of one person who said, people want to be downtown now, and I think that's true. I think we've done enough to stimulate the desire. She said maybe the city should be charging people a fee to be able to develop downtown. I think that somebody's going to want to do it, whether they do or not. As for KLCC, if the development costs them money, which it would, then the developer should pay that. Then I have a question about parking. How much does it cost to park by the month in the city-owned lot?
It can be approximately $50 a month, depending on the lot.
So you need to add that to the rent because most people will have cars. I mean, when you talk about affordable rent, that should be considered too, I think. And the price that I saw didn't look awfully low to me. I was confused also about 30% have to be, what did it say? I remember, it didn't say affordable.
Moderate income units.
Moderate income, okay. And also said that 100% will be.
They are committing and they are required to have 30% of the
Yes.
units be moderate income for the length of the MUFTI. But at the time that the project opens, they believe 100% of the units will qualify, but 70% of those may change as, for example, rents go up in the
Oh, I
downtown
see.
core.
Okay, that wasn't quite clear. But I think that Lloyd Hellickson's, I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name, is it? That his argument made a lot of sense, and obviously he had done a great deal of work using factual material. And I think that is more convincing than the opinions of people who will approve any tax break. And there are a lot of those people who say, yes, whatever tax break you want, you can have. And I will be voting against this. Thank you.
George Brown?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I'm going to go to the minority report that was prepared by Lloyd Hellickson and Bill Aspergren. They, in fact, both of them concluded that the MUFTI is not needed for this project. But they further said they would support personally, and Mr. Hellickson's been a vocal opponent of MUFTI, he said he would support it for this project. So that was the attitude. The reason, if you go to the minority report, I hope everyone read it, and I agree with this. The applicant and Johnson Economics, the independent analyst, who, by the way, is required, I mean, it's in the ordinance that the manager has to get an independent analyst. So their two key assumptions are way too high. They're flawed. They do not mirror basic reality, current reality. Specifically, the 6% interest rate on the bank loan, that's way too high. Currently, it's 3.8 to 4%. And you may say, well, what big deal? It's just 2%. That makes a huge difference in the return on the investment. And the capitalization rate is way too high, too, at 6.25. It's true, it says in the report that, gee, they range from 6.5 to 5.5, but here's a report that was given by Duncan and Brown in April, and they chart the cap rates. But there's not just one cap rate, they're different for different types of projects. The highest one is for regional malls, and that one was high. That is currently about, but see, even that one is 6%. It's not 6.25. It goes down for office building, down again for a warehouse. Apartments are the lowest cap rate. They've been trending down. Their high was 5 years ago at the height of the, the housing meltdown, financial meltdown. It's gone down, declined steadily every year since then, with a tiny little blip 2 years ago, back up, and then it's trending down. All of these cap rates are trending down. Currently for apartments, it's under 5.5 and trending down. That makes a huge rate, a difference in the developer's, return on investment. Huge. It just changes all, so taking the data, the cost data of the developer and running all that, and that's in the minority report. That's what all those pages of tables were. But if you go, here's the summary of all that. Yes, please, Mayor.
Claire?
Thank you. I had a few questions before I have any comments. So, in the AIS, I didn't understand, and Councilor Taylor kind of referenced it also, it says that Granite Property is committed to maintaining a minimum of 30% of units, which is required by the MUPD, right, that qualify as moderate income during the MUPD period, and then intends for all units to qualify, for all units, not just 30%, to qualify. So are they planning to have all the units at moderate income from the get-go and keep that going if it's financially feasible, or that seemed contradictory.
Well, the answer is it's hard to tell what's going to happen in year 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, because affordability is based on what your average wage is in the community, and they don't really know what that's going to be in the future. And so I think it's an unknown is what that really is reflecting, is they don't know what the market conditions are going to be, where rents are going to go, and where average median family wages are going to go. So it's hard to tell whether they can meet it 3 or 4 years from now. They believe they can meet it today, and that's what they're committing to because of that uncertainty about what happens in the future.
So their goal right now, in addition to meeting the minimum requirements, is to have all of the units in a moderate income price range upon opening.
Yes, that's what they've stated, yes.
Do you have an idea of what kind of businesses they would like to bring to that first floor?
We don't have definite information about the tenants that they're looking at, but I know that they've had conversations with food and retail. They're looking for something that people walking by would walk into, and also something that would serve the tenants above. So it's really about walkability, but it's also about the market conditions.
Do you know if they would put another bar in there?
I think that there would be some restrictions on what kind of a bar it would be because their residence is above. But I don't have specific information about exactly the tenant that they're looking at.
Yeah, I think it would be great if they could attract some non-alcohol related retail to that space, because that block is pretty saturated with alcohol related establishments, which is fine, but sometimes a mix is is better, and when you're living above it, definitely. a better. And then I also have concerns about the KLCC tower. My feeling is that I would be more inclined to support this MUPD application if we added a requirement that the developer pay for the relocation of the KLCC tower, and that they could take advantage of our low interest loan if they wanted to pay for it that way, but I don't feel that the city should be responsible for paying for relocating that tower.
Chris?
Thank you. Yeah, and I had two real questions, and the KLCC tower was one of them, so I would agree with that. I think it's not KLCC's fault, and I think they should be held harmless, which you talked about doing, but I also think they should also be held financially harmless and operationally harmless. KLCC needs to be able to continue to broadcast, so I would support that as a addition. The second question I had, when we reviewed this before, there was some question about the tenant to the north and their concerns about access to the property along the alley. Have those been resolved?
We had a number of conversations with them in April relative to bringing this forward for your decision, your action, and they asked if they would be ever eligible to purchase in a similar way that back property. And we walked the property with them, and that would be a decision. They would make a proposal, they would bring it to this body, and then they would, for the Urban Renewal Agency, and then the Urban Renewal Agency could make that decision. I think that there are some logistical challenges relative to how firewalls work. And they also aren't the property on the alley, so they don't have window access. They'd have a building next to them to the south, but they wouldn't to the north, but they'd still have a firewall issue. So there are some logistical challenges, but it is absolutely possible for them to bring that forward.
Okay, so the neighbors to the north have withdrawn, or they're no longer protesting?
We did not hear any further protests of any kind from them after the discussion relative to the Urban Renewal Agency's action.
Okay, so they did get in touch with them and talk with them, and they have not continued to protest?
Exactly.
Okay, because I wanted to make sure they were not somehow getting lost between the cracks. Johnson Financial, did they prepare tables and information and spreadsheets and other information they worked from to reach their conclusion?
Yes.
So they didn't just throw darts at a dartboard, they actually had information and facts and knowledge in their recommendation?
Yes.
Okay. And 8 of the 10 members of the committee accepted that recommendation and said that was acceptable to them, that they were in agreement with that?
7 did, and 1 member didn't vote, wasn't participating.
Didn't participate. So 7 of the 10 agreed with Johnson Financial's conclusions. And Johnson Financial, I assume, does this, as you said, on a regular basis. So this is their work. This is what they do for a living.
Correct.
Okay. For me, a lot of what drives this is the outcome. I mean, the whole reason for having this program is to get an outcome. So I'm saying, well, what is the outcome we're going to get? One of our outcomes, which we have stated, is we want to increase the number of affordable housing in downtown. That's why we approved it for just downtown initially, is we wanted to make sure that we continue to provide incentive and work to get development downtown. And we want that development to be affordable. We don't want to just build a lot of expensive penthouses downtown. We want to build units that people can afford. And 30% was kind of the minimum standard, but we've talked a lot about affordability in general for downtown. Does the granting of this MUPD, in terms of their financial pro forma, allow them to be able to provide more affordable units at the end of construction? And if they didn't have the MUPD and for some reason they could build, would they continue to provide low-income units because of because they didn't have a MUPD? I mean, are we getting low-income units, or not low-income, but we're getting affordable units because the MUPD allows them to pencil that out?
Well, there's a couple ways to look at it. I think what we've actually heard from the developer is that their project doesn't work without MUPD, so I don't think there is a scenario, at least coming from the developer, that they would build without it. That's always debatable, however. I think the operating cost associated with the property taxes does ultimately affect the rents one way or another. So if you had a scenario where there was no tax exemption, you would have to increase the rents to make that
make up the difference
work, or vice versa. The availability to tax exemption allows you to flatten rent, so to speak, so that they're more maybe closer to market. Because the newest constructed property is always the most expensive, so this allows you maybe to be closer to market, is the way I would kind of think of it.
Okay, so two of the benefits, there might be others, but two would be, you get more housing downtown that's affordable, and because you provide a MUPD, you can keep the rents low because their cost to build it was lower.
At least keep them reasonable.
At least keep them reasonable, but lower than they would be if they didn't have it. Okay. And then the last one for him, we will know the zip codes of all the people who worked on the project upon completion.
Correct.
Okay.
Alan?
Yeah, the KLCC impacts and the way that we have this set up doesn't work for me. What it says in the resolution is KLCC signal connection shall be maintained at no cost to KLCC. That doesn't say that the developer pays for it. That could mean that the city's on the hook for it, and it could be, I don't know, a couple of $100,000. Who knows how much it's going to cost? We don't have a plan yet. I think that this section should say, and the developer needs to pay the cost. And that should be kind of for a public asset like KLCC, that's a very important part of this. Overall, I think we did a good job in our review process, to the extent that we did, in getting real public benefits into this process. We got green building features, we got local hires with the good local economic development impacts, use of minority and women-owned businesses, compliance with the laws, contribution to moderate income housing. My problem is still with the needs assessment, and that question originally was and still is, can we absolutely tell whether the project will be built if it will only be built if it gets a MUPD? And given the number of assumptions that go into this analysis, and using different assumptions give you different results, I'm real skeptical and continue to be skeptical of our ability to assess this adequately and definitively answer that question. In our review process, though, we were headed down what I thought was a good path, but we failed to include three parts of that in the end. That was a cap on the rate of return, reporting requirements that double check the need calculation retroactively, and the clawback if it exceeded the ROI. And without those requirements, I don't think we can have the confidence we need in the need calculation, and we'll continually have this controversy about MUPD. That's why I pushed really hard to get those included. Unfortunately, it didn't garner majority support, and maybe we should go back and think about this. This is a perfect example of why I was trying to get those included. It might not have solved the problem, but it sure as heck would have alleviated some of the controversy, especially with the clawback provision. The minority report makes this point really clearly, in that it just creates controversy of whether or not there's a need calculation or not. You also mentioned this is market-based housing, but how many beds have we added downtown in the last 4 to 5 years, including Capstone and all the other ones?
It's probably a couple of thousand if you take in student housing, because you have the Hub, Capstone, and LCC, which is a big number of beds. And then you have a few small projects like the two renovations at Park Place and First on Broadway.
Right. Yeah. So, I think we've done a great job of getting housing into the area. I think that was part of the reason Whole Foods moved in there. And I'll need a second round there.
So
There is going to be a second
I'm
round.
just going to point out that we have two small items of business that we want to do before we leave today. I don't know how time sensitive getting to a conclusion today is on this. Can someone tell me that?
I believe that there are some risks if we are not able to come to a decision today. I can't speak directly to that. This is just information that I have from Granite Properties. They are looking for a decision because they are trying to proceed prior to September 1st.
So I've got 4 people in the queue. I'd like to have you to either make a decision to vote or to postpone about 10 after. Okay. So next round, and I did have one question, and one is, what happens if you find out that a developer, even though they've got local addresses, has purposely brought people from out of state to work on a project?
We can't disqualify them, and Glenn can weigh in, but there's some constitutional issues with residency-based hiring as part of a program, so we can't disqualify them. I think we want to be out front on that. I think it really comes to a lot of, and several of these have already come up, and what we would do is come back and report, and there is an annual reporting to the council. So I think Councilor Zelenka has brought up something that the panel has a frustration about. How do you deal with all these numbers, and how do you come to a conclusion? And maybe that's something that should be readdressed. And you know, this issue, maybe if we're finding that it's not working like we wanted it to, but based on the data, maybe it's something that we would address with the council as we come back annually to look at the program and how it's worked. So I think it's a you know, we're trying to go into it with as much information that gives us some confidence that there's going to be local hiring. And if that's not the result we're getting, I think it really warrants a relook at what we're doing as we continue to look at the program.
The only other question I have is that the panel, you had a person abstain on the panel, right? Didn't vote.
He actually didn't participate. He wasn't at any of the meetings, so I just want to make that clear, yes.
So are we replacing that person?
I think we need to follow up with that person and find out if they want to continue to
Because
participate.
I actually think everybody, that it's not a large group, everybody should participate. We should get full measure
I agree.
of all of that. Okay, Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. What I was trying to get to, I'm sorry if I was asking that question in an unclear manner. What I was saying was that the applicant has provided staff with a plan that they intend to have 80% local hire. Is that correct?
The requirement is for the spending, so it's 80% of the total costs for construction contracts and professional services. That's the standard that council approved in the ordinance after we worked with the construction stakeholder group that said that local developers and local contractor companies tend to hire local employees.
Okay, so I wasn't asking that so much as I was asking the specific question. So I'm hearing you say, yes, that they've provided a plan, and that's part of the ordinance that says, yes, they intend to spend 80% of the money on local contractors. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that's going to be your measurement, not the employees, the contractors.
We're going to look at both.
Okay.
Because we are going to have data on who actually worked on the site.
When you present to the citizen panel and you say, we've found that in fact this project had X% of local hires, will that be based on the number of employees, or will that be based on the amount paid to employees, or will that be based on the percentage of contractors?
It'd be the residency of the people working on the project. So that would
The
be
employees.
the employees, yes.
Okay, thank you.
George. Yep.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, you know, I don't think we should vote today. I think we can put this off till we get back from break. The ordinance requires the manager to deliver his recommendation within 135 days. The application being submitted, he's done that. He recommends that we approve it. That part's taken care of. We will or will not follow his recommendation. Then the other requirement is, I believe it's 180 days after submission. By that 181st day, if we haven't acted, it automatically goes into effect. And that day would be October 25th, which is a Tuesday. So it would be October 24th, which is a Monday, but we would have to make our final decision. I think we could do it in September. We have 2 weeks in September. I think we need a little more time to wrap, especially for people who may not have had a chance to read the minority report. Got time to do that. I think there's, you know, questions that people may have. This is the pro formas were presented in a different format than the ones that we're used to, the ones that we saw for Core Campus and for the Capstone. And so, and some different terms are being used that I'm not sure that we all understand all of them. you know, at a cellular level. It's just, so I, you know, and I'd just like to point out that, you know, the composition of the panel, Mr. Hellickson owns apartments, and he's very familiar with getting loans from banks and talking to bankers. He's very familiar with all these terms. He knows how to read pro formas. He knows all the financial terms. He's very sophisticated that way. And so, is he a developer? No, he's not. No, and he's never had to really produce these types of pro formas for his bank loans, but he has understanding of them that I think much better than probably any of us counselors. And so I really respect his work. And if you go to page 1 of the minority report, he's got a summary of all of the worksheets that he worked up using the developer's own information, all of their cost information, including the original proposed rents. And that's all the same. It's not, none of this assumes that rents are going to go up. They may, and they could. I mean, what should be better for the developer? I mean, they'd make this look even better if they raise the rents on everything except the 10% of the workforce housing. So I really believe we need more time to fully digest all this and study this. I mean, because the
Thank you, George. Claire, you're up.
Thanks. Well, I did happen to get an email from one of the folks involved in the development who did say they felt some urgency, that the current owner of the property is kind of pushing them to move this along. Whether that's our sense of urgency, I think, is another question, but I just thought I'd share that. And I also saw in our packet that KLCC, you know, was probably a very quick estimate, rough estimate on their part, but they estimated $40,000 to relocate their equipment on their own roof. I almost wonder if it would make sense to relocate it onto the roof of this building if it was built. And so just a couple of thoughts. You know, we crafted this MUPD program pretty carefully. It's not perfect, as Councilor Zelinka pointed out, but to encourage further housing development downtown, where redevelopment, frankly, is more expensive than it is in other parts of the city. I do feel that we still need to incentivize downtown development. And as I, you know, demonstrated earlier this week, I'm not someone who just votes for every tax break program we have in the city. I can tell you that all the units in Broadway Place are full, because I have a family member who's seeking to move here to Eugene, and we went and looked there, and she says they pretty much are full all the time. People do move out, and, you know, units come up, but they are taken really fast. I do feel this is a project that fits with our goals for downtown housing. If we were to grant the MUPD, then we would be guaranteed of having some percentage of those units be at that more affordable rate. If we take the chance that they'll develop it anyway without the MUPD, we won't have that guarantee, and we'd likely have more expensive housing downtown, which may not fit with our goals. It redevelops a currently vacant storefront, provides another mix of housing with the number of studio apartments that they're planning that is really lacking right now in our community. And these are local developers investing local dollars that they made here locally with their business back into our community. So they are folks who care about the future of our community. This project would add more life to a block that could use it, hopefully with additional retail that's not alcohol related. As far as parking, you know, one of the reasons people like to think about moving downtown is the opportunity to get rid of their car and to live without a car. We have good transit. We have grocery stores now with the Kiva there, and now Whole Foods, the library, a lot of things downtown that you can live and work there without needing a car. So those are just my comments. So I'd likely support it today as long as we change that one provision about the KLCC signal connection shall be maintained at no cost to KLCC or the city of Eugene.
Alan, and then you put the motion on the table after you're finished speaking.
Yeah, do we just make a motion to change the resolution?
If you make the motion, you can make the motion to approve the resolution with the following change, and then just specify the change that you want.
What's the remedy if the project doesn't meet the moderate income housing requirement, say in out years, say year 6?
They have to pay the fee. If you recall, they're either you meet it or pay a fee. So you're either do one or the other.
And so if it just meets it, does it mean the entire fee, the 10%, or just 1 year's worth of the fee?
We'd have to go look at the
Doesn't
ordinance,
say in there.
but I think it's either, a scenario where you'd have to pay for each year you don't meet that, or potentially you could lose the exemption, but I don't know that we've really dug into that scenario at this point.
Because you pay that over years 3 through 10, and if you didn't make it in one, that would be 1/7 of the 10%.
That is correct.
Or maybe make sure that they do it, it's the full 10%, which I think we should do. I agree with the resolution to the KLCC needs to be on the developer, not on the city. And I also think that the need calculation for me still has too much controversy, and without those provisions in it, I just think we're going to keep having this problem over and over again. And I'm not sure we actually need to subsidize downtown housing at this time, especially given the number of beds we've attracted to the downtown. So at this point, I would support the application.
Motion on the table, please.
Yes. I move to adopt resolution in attachment F to approve the tax exemption with the change to
Section 1,
Section 1.
paragraph I, adding the words "or to the city" at the end of the sentence.
Section 1, paragraph I, which adds to the end of the sentence, or the city of Eugene.
Second.
Moved and seconded. George?
I want to make an alternative motion. I move to, I'll speak to it if I get a second. I move to postpone final decision on the MUPI application until we return from break.
Second.
Moved and seconded.
All right. We haven't even had half an hour discussion on this. Well, it's been maybe 45 minutes, okay? That's total, and this is the first rollout of the new MUPTI. We have to get this one right. It's not, I like the project. I think it's going to be a really neat thing. However, I think we're moving too fast here because we've received credible alternative information that the MUPTI is not necessary for this project, and I don't think we've talked about that enough. And we haven't really examined all the information. Now, the amount is, in the scheme of things, of the exemption, is relatively trivial. I suppose you could say it's, what, $60,000 a year, maybe? That's peanuts, considering, all of the needs of the city and the big picture, but it's the principle of the thing, because the next one could be for a really huge project. There's several plots of land downtown that would support a really big housing project when the market is right. You just basically look at any big parking lot downtown, that's a potential apartment house. And so if we don't get this one right, if we start off on a bad foot and rush this through simply because we want to see housing downtown, that's a terrible mistake. The ordinance is still flawed, by the way. We have a really unrealistic, terrible definition of workforce housing. There's over 500 jurisdictions in the United States that have workforce housing requirements for any new construction. Nobody defines it like we do. 100% AMI, that's ridiculous. And nobody else gives a 10-year property tax exemption to do so. Ours is probably the worst one in the whole country, using that as a definition. It's always defined as a range of income from 60% to 100%. It can be higher than 100%, but that's in certain communities like Aspen, Colorado, where it started, which is a very high income, high housing cost community. So theirs, I think, is 120% or maybe even 130% of it is regarded, but it's a range. And if we're going to pick a percent, this is for another work session. We can't resolve this at this one. But Councilor Zelenka is absolutely right. I think I voted against his because I thought that we were going to come up with a meaningful workforce housing definition, and that will have to wait for another work session. But in the meantime, we should not approve this today. I don't think we've had enough. I'm definitely not convinced that there's a need, financial need for the developer. I think Mr. Hellickson's information points that out very well.
Thank you. Ready to vote on this? All those in favor of George's substitute motion, please indicate. 1, 2, 3 in opposition. 1, 2, 3, 4, it goes down. You're back to the main motion. Ready to vote on the main motion. All those in favor of the main motion, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4 in opposition. 1, 2, 3, it passes. All right, we'll move on to the last couple items of the day. We have, as you see in your thing, the ordinance concerning climate recovery. Glenn, you want to explain the difference of what we're doing here?
Certainly. There's only one word that's changed. It's changing in subsection 4 in the middle of page 1. It had said Eugene's proportionate share. It now says Eugene's average share. That's the only change from what you saw the other night. I don't have any legal concerns about making that change.
And Alan, would you like to speak to why that change is there?
Yeah, it's a holdover language from when we were talking about the carbon budget process that we had. Simply stated, the proportional share of a person in Eugene is not in changing in the amount of greenhouse gases needed to be reduced is not the same as a villager in a third world country. So proportionally, it would be very, very different. The average is the global average. Every person has the same one. That's what that number is supposed to be getting at, and that's why this
You put the motion on the table and I'll call it.
What is the motion? I move, excuse me, I move to adopt the July 27, 2016 version of Council Bill 5157, an ordinance concerning climate recovery.
Second.
Moved and seconded, Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. Glenn, the other night I asked a couple of questions about this, and I want to understand the nature of it before we go any farther. So this is, again, as I had asked the manager once before, even before the other night, this is the shall may question. So what we have here isn't actually a tool of force to get to a particular place so much as what it is a set of goals that we're going to act on and report back on. Would you say that's an accurate?
Yes. Here, the shall is a shall directing the city manager to basically do analysis, see how we're doing in terms of reductions, bringing options back to the council. So the shall is a mandatory obligation on the manager. It's not a mandatory obligation on the council, and it's not a mandatory obligation on the public.
Right. So when we get people at the microphone talking to us about what we need to force people to do, it's clearer to say we've set some goals that we hope we can accomplish as a community, but we're not going to be forcing people to do particular things by law. Is that correct?
The ordinance does not force people to do those things. The council has the option in the future to either impose requirements or not, but the ordinance does not require you to impose those.
Right.
The ordinance itself does not impose those.
Based on the steepness of the curve, Mr. Manager, that was presented to us, do you think it highly likely, somewhat likely, maybe, that we will reach those goals or be in a position to require you to purchase carbon offsets?
Optimist or pessimist?
What I don't know is all the different actions that would be required for us to get there. I haven't seen that full analysis of what that would take. And so what our intent would be is with this is to bring to the council the options that would say, here's ways that we can achieve the outcome that is articulated in the ordinance. And then, of course, you'd have a chance to say yay or nay on those. So our intent would be to bring back what those what it would take to be on that curve.
Okay. So there's no way to do any, at this point, there's no way to do any kind of financial analysis of impact to the city's budget for us taking this action today. Is that correct?
Correct. I do not know what the financial impact would be on all the actions.
More
that may
importantly,
be
neither do
required.
we, right? We don't know the financial impact of this action today, do we?
You haven't gotten them from us, so we haven't provided that to you. That's correct.
So, Mike, let me add to that. The financial impact, if you adopt this ordinance, is to require more staff work. There is there is no requirement, and
Until we take a future action. No,
unless you take a future action. And so when you mention the carbon offsets, the ordinance, excuse me, does not require you to do that. I just want to be clear. The manager will bring you options. It may be the only way to achieve this goal is with a carbon offset, but the ordinance does not require you to approve a budget for a carbon offset.
And it doesn't require us to achieve the goal. It requires you to tell us we're not achieving the goal or we are, correct?
Absolutely. And then you'll have options to how you get to the goal. You'll have the TBL analysis for those options, and you'll have a cost-benefit analysis, and then you can decide to do one of those options or to do none of the options. And if you choose to do none of the options, that does not mean that the City of Eugene is violating the ordinance.
So to be accurate when we're describing this, we're passing an ordinance today that doesn't require us to fulfill these goals.
It does not require the council to take future action. It requires the manager to analyze and bring options back to the council as to how you could accomplish it.
Betty?
So it's a feel-good ordinance. I wonder if whether we really need to adopt it right now, or whether I would like to consider some of the suggestions made by the speakers at the public forum, at the public hearing, I should say. There were a number of suggestions which seemed to make sense, and we haven't considered them. So I wonder, would it be possible for us to consider each of those suggestions and someone keep a record of them? And
We do have a copy of them.
if we could consider each of those and think whether we should add them to the ordinance, or could we add them later?
You can certainly add them later through preparation of an additional ordinance. So if you don't do it now, nothing precludes the council from having another work session, looking at each of those, looking at anything else you want, and then giving us direction to bring back a new ordinance to do whatever it is you want to include at that time.
Okay, could I make a motion to that effect?
Not at this point,
Not at
because
this
there's a motion to adopt the ordinance,
Yeah,
but when,
but I mean, today,
you can certainly make a motion to
rather
direct
than
the
asking,
manager.
rather than asking for a work session.
If the mayor entertains that motion, you can make that motion.
Okay, thank you.
George Polling.
I guess maybe I'm missing something. Maybe you answered it when you were talking to Mike. But you're saying this ordinance doesn't require the city to do anything or anybody to do anything other than for the city manager to establish goals? Or accomplish goals, rather?
So the council has established the goals. That's what's in 6.675. If you adopt this, you will now have included, and it's on page 2 of the ordinance, specific targets and benchmarks. And then the manager is required to assess how well we're doing in reaching those targets and benchmarks. And if we're not on target, to bring back to the council options to get us back on to those targets, get us on the curves. And then the council can say, yes, you're willing to impose or pay for that option, or you're not.
Okay. I guess my confusion is 6.675 starts out, the city shall carry out the requirements of sections 6.680 to 90 of this code in order to achieve the following goals. And if you go to sub 3, it says by the year 2030, all businesses, individuals, and other living or working, or others living or working in the city collectively shall reduce the total not per capita use of fossil fuels. to me, I guess I'm getting a little bit confused because that sounds like we're requiring people that either live or work here in the city to do something.
And the reason why it's a little confusing is because it was the language that you read at the beginning of that section. We're going to achieve these goals, which really means we're going to attempt to achieve these goals by following the requirements in the rest of the ordinance. And the rest of the ordinance says we're going to basically stair-step into this. We're going to see how well we're doing with the actions and the plans that have already been developed, and then the manager is going to bring back to you, if we're not on track, what it would take to get there. Absolutely, there is a goal to reduce, as the language you just read, but there's no legally mandated requirement for any particular business to reduce. And in fact, the conversation that, I don't remember who asked the question, but the conversation that you had when you adopted the original ordinance was, does this mean that every single business is going to have to reduce by a particular amount? And the answer was, no, it could be that some businesses are reducing more and other businesses are reducing less, or some residents are reducing more and some residents are reducing less. This is a community-wide goal. It's not an individual business or individual resident goal.
Okay, I understand what you're saying, but boy, to me, it doesn't sound that way. I'm sorry.
Okay, we've got to try to move forward here. Alan and then Chris.
Yeah, I think the appropriate way to look at this is to, from a process perspective, is first you set the goal, then you create the plan. So the revised or updated Climate and Energy Action Plan, the CAP, is what is required to be developed here, and that will create the action plan for council's review and hopefully final adoption. All of this conversation surges urgency in needing to get on with that work and move this forward today, and do that robust public involvement, and then getting to a new CAP, and includes that action plan. The CAP is what will tell us what to do, and that's where the rubber meets the road. So that's what we're trying to get at. I did consider what the folks said at the public hearing, and I talked to some of those folks afterwards and emailed them before deciding on this modest change, Betty. So if we do need to change it, we can change it at a later date, and I would suggest that we do that and look at that as part of the upcoming process to update the CAP and see if that needs to occur there. I think that's the appropriate place to do that and look at it.
Chris?
Yeah, I think Alan said pretty much what I was going to say. You will be bringing us the specific teeth and the specific action parts, and I want to hear what all of those are, not try to anticipate specific ones. So I'm comfortable with this as the next step as we get to ultimately what will be a set of things. So I'm okay.
Just comment that what you've done is, as Alan said, is take a plan, which is the implementation of goals that you've set, and actually taken one step further and put them in ordinance and said, this is what we intend to do. And that's a sign of seriousness on the part of the city to try to move forward on this. It's not a legal requirement, but it is a sign of serious commitment. Okay, so Mike, and then we're going to vote.
Thank you, Mayor. I think for the sake of the public watching, and I think maybe for my friend George too, it's rather like, I would say, my questions around the shall and may parts were also about the intent of our future action. So, for example, the language says shall, which uses the ordinance and the city government as a means of force. So it says we shall require. So, for example, that kind of dictates what sort of options the manager might bring forward in the future. One of the goals, for example, the 50% reduction and then by 2030 in community-wide fossil fuel use. We might discover that our current direction diminishing that kind of plateaus. And so we might need to incentivize the continued diminishment of fossil fuel use. And one of those options might be $1 a gallon, $2 a gallon local gas tax in order to emphasize, in order to try and drive down those sales and that use. So that's the sort of thing I was asking about, really, was why, how are we going to approach this with, are we going to force people to comply at some point? And it sounds like those are all options and decisions for another day, but we're not actually forcing anyone to do anything today.
And one comment from Alan.
Yeah, one is that there are a whole bunch of options that can occur, including a lot of that incentivize. Most of the options actually save people money to get to the climate and recovery ordinance goals. So you should do all those first. The other point is that the stuff that you both, Mike and George, are talking about is stuff that we've already adopted, is already part of the ordinance, and that was adopted months ago. And the only part that's actually under consideration right now is the addition of this section 4 and the changes to the following section that include the benchmarks. So the stuff that out the shall and may and all and the other goals that we already adopted is already law.
Voted on already.
And voted on.
All right, ready to vote on this. All those in favor, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and none in opposition. Thank you. One more issue that Councilor Brown, and I appreciate him bringing this forward. Councilor Brown, you have it in front of you guys, right?
Yeah, shall I just go ahead and read it, the motion? I move to approve a continuation of the neighborhood matching grant funds previously awarded to Community Center for the Performing Arts, and that those funds be taken from the funds approved as part of the FY17 budget for the neighborhood matching grant program.
Second.
Moved and seconded.
Well, just very briefly, I hope everyone saw John Pincus's email. It was pretty self-explanatory. They've been working on this vintage streetlight project for quite a while now, and jumped through many, many hoops and fulfilled many, many requirements, and everything was ready to go, and then eWeb came along with a project that had precluded them starting on that. And they were awarded the grant funds, and so, but the eWeb's project went on, and they missed their window. They've raised the matching funds. They're ready to go. The funds were put back into the general fund and the match program. So by taking them out of there and giving it to them as originally intended, we're not going to be prejudicing anybody next year, because the fund's bigger, and just in giving it to them, it will allow them to start their project much sooner, and they won't have to wait till next spring and go through the whole grant application process again and further delay the project. So that's it.
Do you have anything to say about this particular?
No, we're fine with this.
Good, good. All right, ready to vote on this? All in favor, please indicate. 1, 2, 7 in favor and none in opposition. It passes. Have a great break,